So we've analysed the budget, we've gone through the many points that Rachel Reeves presented to Parliament. We're now going to turn our attention to international trade. So let me introduce the three guests that we've got with us now. We've got Rick Shaw and Matt Watts from Evelyn Partners and John Sammon of Santa Fe. Before we start, gents, just tell us a little bit about your particular role.
So my name's Matt Watts, and I work with businesses who are looking to trade internationally, typically from the UK, so that's UK outbound businesses.
Hi there, I'm Rick Shaw. I'm an international tax partner, particularly focused on supporting businesses with managing their compliance obligations for moving employees into or out of the UK.
Hi, I'm John Sammon. I work for Santa Fe. I'm a senior business lead for a global relocation management company, primarily in the relocation, destination and moving space, supporting companies on a global scale with their employee and employer journey.
Excellent, thank you very much. You explained your roles far better than I would have been able to, so that's a good move. Let's get straight down to it then, shall we, with the question that, what's the motivation for companies that makes them want to expand? Why do they want to do it? Who wants to take that one?
I'll go first, if that's okay. Well, particularly the US seems to be a target market for a lot of companies. I've been doing a lot of work recently with the Department of Business and Trade, and they released some information, some statistics about the US market in particular. The 4 quarters up to the second half of 2024, it's a $188 billion export location, with 22% of trade coming out of the UK going into the US. So the feeling is that there's a big market there to exploit, and it's a well-trodden path, particularly in few sectors as well. So a number of trade advisors have highlighted the tech industry, food industry in particular, and also life sciences as well. So it feels like there's a big opportunity to expand into that market.
But I guess with big opportunity comes the need for big, proper, sensible planning before you actually dip your toe in the water, doesn't it?
Absolutely right. And I think part of that is getting the people part of that right.
It's getting the right people, for sure. I mean, I think there's two sides to that. There's the actual individuals that you need to perhaps take over to the US to be able to basically take their knowledge and their skill set and take it over to the new market, so they can share that knowledge and share that culture and understanding of the business itself. But also you've got the local market itself in the US, which is obviously it's such a sort of wide pool of talent in essence, so we can go to that market and utilise and find the correct individuals for the right roles. So it's a combination of both that you're looking at from a talent perspective.
Because culture is a huge thing, isn't it? You know, on the face of it, we all speak a version of English on both sides of the Atlantic. So there's a common bond there, isn't there? But in other ways, for a company to thrive in a marketplace overseas, you've got to have some locals there, haven't you? And they maybe have the cultural knowledge, but not the business knowledge. Is that, you're nodding at that one?
I think that's right, Carl. Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a common misconception that we are very similar to the US in terms of our business culture. And yes, there are similarities, but there are so many differences as well. And one of the key differences that UK businesses in particular can often overlook is the huge variation in terms of the regional variations within the US.
You've got 50 governments, effectively, haven't you? Really?
Exactly right. And I think it's therefore really important to understand that. And I think that will go on to sort of dictate a lot of key factors in terms of what businesses look at when they're looking at the US. They need to understand sort of where you need to be. That's the first question. I think you really need to ask, because the regional variations is so vast. It's a bit like sort of looking at the US. Yes, it's one country, but actually it's 50 different countries, and you should consider it more like the EU in that respect.
And are there states within the US that you like it if somebody says, we want to expand into Illinois or whatever it is, and do you roll your eyes and think, oh no, not Illinois, they're one of the worst to deal with? How different are the differences between the various states?
Oh, they are very stark. I mean, I think one of the key things to consider is the cost. Sort of different states have different sort of cost levels when looking to set up. It won't come as a surprise, I don't think, to many of your viewers that For example, New York is a very, very expensive state to be in, and therefore, if you want to be in New York and a business needs to be in New York, then you have to be there. But you must understand that the cost of doing business in New York is going to be a lot higher than a lot of the other the US states.
It's, I guess, the same as the situation over here. People think we want to be based in London. Well, you be based in London, yes, you're in the biggest city, but actually the overheads, the transport, the accommodation, it all has to be thrown in, doesn't it?
I think you need to know why you're choosing a particular location, and there could be a number of factors. On the point of cost, different states have state tax for individuals. So if you employ in a location that has state tax, there's going to be a tax consequence for individuals, particularly if you're sending individuals to live and work in the US. But by the same token, if you need people to be in a similar time zone, then as Matt said, you might choose East Coast, so that they're closer aligned to maybe the C-suite back in the UK. It could be that that's an easier transport link as well. You can get there more quickly, or vice versa. It's really understanding what all the factors are, and absolutely, if you decide a particular location, then understanding what the consequences of that are.
Yeah.
Particularly, I guess, because a lot of the people that you're going to be talking to, they're not looking to move lock, stock and barrel from the UK to the US. They're looking at having a presence both sides of the Atlantic then. So
Absolutely. It's, I think to quantify, it's like those local nuances. Without understanding the local nuances in each particular state or location in the US will drive and determine which is the best way forward. How should that entity be set up, what that should look like, what's the considerations around the tax elements of that. When you relocate somebody, each state has different requirements around how to move somebody into what location, even to the little detail of relocating somebody into a particular type of property. Some places don't have white goods, some do have white goods. So it's so detailed about what you're looking to do and over what timeline that move looks like. And that touches also on the visa elements as well. Depending how you set the business up will determine what type of visa you will require and over what timeline. So you've got to really dig deep and pre-plan and really understand your marketplace before you can take that first step. And that's always something that I would always suggest as early as possible.
we're going to be talking a little bit later on with one of the other panels about companies looking to bring their business into the UK, and I guess we'll talk about the Brexit implications and the paperwork implications. What are the paperwork implications like between the UK and US? I guess it's not straightforward.
No, it isn't, Carl. The US is very high in terms of the number of rules and regulations. So there's a barrier to entry there. And what businesses can find is that they can trigger requirements to register in the US before they've actually realised that, and that's really sort of key thing to understand. You must take advice sort of as soon as you practically can to ensure that you're not sort of triggering requirements to register in the US for. So it's not even just for tax reasons. Could be sort of other legal reasons before you've actually sort of realised it.
I know you. I mean, some of the statistics that I've seen that you guys have got showing the interest in moving into the US shows just how strong the demand for the market is. But is that because it's the best place to be if you want to be in an overseas market, or is it just because it's the best known? Is it the right, or automatically the right decision for everyone?
I mean, it's still, in terms of GDP, it's still the biggest market for businesses to go at. Even though, yes, as we've talked about, there's a lot of regional variations. But when you look at the US economy, sort of as a whole, it's still by far and away the biggest market. So businesses, feel that they need to be there.
I agree with that.
So let's talk about a checklist, if you like, a mental checklist, crucial factors that businesses need to bear in mind if they're going to get it right. Where do they start? What do they need to do? Is there a list of half a dozen things you've got to say, right, fulfill all of these before you even start being serious?
Well, I think the first thing to ask yourself is why you're going. Is it to access the market, as we've already touched on? Is it to access sort of the skill set and the workforce? Because that will then dictate, I think, where you need to be within the US. And that's a key question, as we've already touched on as well. I think from that, you will then start to understand how much of a presence you need to have in the US. For example, a manufacturing business might be able to start trading in the US through a series of third-party warehousing arrangements, and that can be quite light touch in terms of so having a presence in the US. Whereas if you're a service industry, you need people on the ground, then you're probably going to have to establish and register a separate legal entity in some way, shape or form in the US from the outset. So I think it's really understanding why you're going, what you're trying to achieve, and then I think from that, a lot of these other questions will flow and will follow.
And John, from a people point of view, what's top of your list? The first conversation you'd want to have with a business thinking of going?
First conversation, it sort of depends on, I think, Matt, you just touched on, it's whether they set it up. Between the route they set up, employed a records company where you don't necessarily actually need to have an entity. You can just move in, you can be into the US very quickly, by about a week, 10 days, as long as you set up the necessary parameters in place to do that. Or if you're doing it from an entity perspective, then you're really taking it back down to understanding which particular visa will relate to the particular type of entity you're setting up. And you're talking about the individual that's moving, what level of budget will they expect to support that individual moving from A to B. And then you're going into the detail of they need somewhere to live, they need somewhere to have children, what time of the year they're moving to that particular country or particular area. There's so many components that need to be considered before you make that final decision that this person needs to move from A to B. So there's a whole list, but starting with visas, understanding why they're going and the rationale behind it, and the timelines are ultimately key to make sure that works.
And timeline-wise, is there a good time of year, a quick time of year, a slow time of year? How does it work?
There's 2 points. It's never too early is the first point, but we still work on quite a lot of individuals will work on schooling timelines of if they have children, then it needs to be.
I was going to ask you that.
Ideally,
family, you've got to find a school. It's got to start at the start of an academic year. You might want to.
In an ideal world, but on the flip side, that doesn't necessarily always work because as the guys from the tax part can talk about, it may cross over two tax years, and Rick can talk a bit more detail about how that looks like. So just because you want it to happen on day X, it may not be able to, and then there's more considerations around that from a tax point of view.
John, set you up, Rick, now.
Yes,
it's all yours.
I'll do my best.
There's something here about, John said it, timelines and understanding what your time pressures are. Do you need someone now? In which case there are mechanisms to do that very quickly. If you can prepare for the right answer, then all those things that we've talked about, so family going, that potentially being the start point, and timing with school years is a big part of that, but understanding the compliance complications of that, because it doesn't fit very neatly with our tax year, which ends at a very different point to the US one. And if you're quite a small company that doesn't have a lot of infrastructure, you could find yourself managing quite a lot of tax compliance in 2 locations, and it's possible to get around that if you plan ahead, get some advice and manage that. And the upside of that is less stress for the individual, so they can focus on the job, which is why you're sending them in the first place. And secondly, you can bring the cost of doing that down quite significantly, because you're in one known tax system and potentially structuring the package in a way that you maximise the efficiency of it and reduce the cost for the business. And I think something that a lot of businesses don't really appreciate when they're sending their first person is it can actually cost about 2 to 4 times what you're paying the person to send someone on secondment. But as we've said, there's a quid pro quo of hiring locally versus sending people that you trust into the business. And it's trying to get that right balance, and as both of my colleagues have said, it's understanding what the key factors are for starting business in the US and what your timeline is. I think knowing those 2 things is really important.
And in a lot of occasions, do you actually have to hold back on some of this until you're actually there to do? You can't do it all before you go, can you?
I think the answer is it depends. Depends what you're doing. I think, as John was saying, we had a client come to us recently. He had found the right candidate in the US to drive sales in the US, knows the market, the right person for the business to take the business forward, but they don't have a presence in the US. So the question was, what do we do in this situation? And the honest answer was, you can use an external agency, as John was talking about, their employer of record, that can issue a legally compliant contract, get someone employed onto a payroll within a matter of days, which to a business that doesn't have that infrastructure is pretty good, frankly, to do that quickly. But there will come a point where that's not the right structure, because that only works where that individual isn't having a bigger impact on the business. And there will come a tipping point, as Matt was talking about, where you will reach a point where you need a more substantive presence. So to your point, Carl, there will typically be a point where you have to make a decision about whether you need something more formal.
And does it make a difference with all of this, whether you are maybe a medium or large-sized corporate or an owner-managed business? Does that shape what you need to do in the order you need to do it then?
The US is quite draconian when it comes to how it applies a lot of its regulations, and unlike the UK, where we do have a sort of lighter touch sort of approach for small businesses who are looking to start up, the US will typically kick in sort of from day one, and therefore that's why you get this situation where businesses can trigger filing requirements before they've actually sort of even realise it. So typically, the rules apply regardless of the size of business.
But just to add to that, the impact and the incentive for the individual is going to be even larger for the founder or owner. I know, John, you were talking about this before. You wanted to talk about the difference on immigration requirements going in at that.
Yeah, so depending on the seniority of the individual will determine the type of visa that you need to take. It's a very long process, like a business plan that you have to put in place to the US sort of government, in effect, to ascertain exactly why you're opening that entity, the reasons behind it, and why you need those individuals to actually make that move to that location. So it's not as simple as some locations around the world where really if A and B make C, you're in. There has to be a real consecrated sort of effort and a lot of time to be able to get that process in place to make sure that it happens. So making sure, again, we go back to pre-planning, identifying what that business looks like, what the process is, how you can get to the end goal is absolutely integral to being a successful transition. And just touching on individuals that relocate, the key thing for them is they want a positive transition moving into a new country, especially being the first move of its kind from an international expansion perspective. It needs to be right, it needs to be comfortable, they need to be happy in their environment. So all of these elements that we've discussed across this platform today is really important to making sure that it's right from both the employer and the employee's perspective.
I mean, you've all been operating in this arena for quite some time now, so I guess you've got quite a library of case studies, of anecdotes, of examples of things that have gone well, things that maybe could have been done differently. Are there any that jump out for you?
I mean, yes, both good and bad, Carl. I'm sort of sorry to say in many respects. I think typically when it works well, it's when businesses have thought really, really carefully about why they're going and where they need to be. I think typically where it hasn't gone as well is where sort of businesses just haven't thought about sort of why they're going to the US, where they need to be, because then sort of you find yourself quite often having to unpick sort of decisions that have been taken in haste.
And that's harder, isn't it?
It is a lot harder, yeah. I mean, another option can be, and I've got a client who's recently done this, is actually sort of partnering up with a business who's already in the US, sort of either through sort of merger or acquisition, because then you've already got a footprint, sort of in the States, and you've got channels, sort of to use, and clearly that's not going to be accessible or the right route for every business, but that's another alternative.
And if you do that, just going back to your people point in immigration, does that make it easier for people to actually get into the US if you've already got a partner over there of some sort?
It can do, depending on the industry you're in and the product or the service that you're trying to deliver. So each visa requirement in the US is taken upon individually, in essence. So it is determined by all of those elements. So to a degree, but you've still got to go through a process, and that's important. It's getting it right from the start, understanding the marketplace, determining what route is the best course of action, and then that outlines you what route you take from an entity or a visa perspective.
Rick, any other case studies or anecdotes or things that spring to mind for you?
Just drawing on a couple of those comments I was making before, move 2 or 3, if you're sending your trusted lieutenants out to carry on the business on your behalf, tend to be easier because you learn from what's gone wrong the first time, unfortunately. It's often what's gone wrong because that's typically the point where advice is sought. But if you can get ahead of that and prepare, as I said, there's cost savings to be had. There's a better experience for the individual as well, understanding what's coming their way, and more clarity around who's picking up which tax consequences and what that means for the individual. I've seen good and bad, much like Matt said. I think typically, to your question before, larger corporates with maybe a more established structure around sending people on assignment tend to have people who've done this before, as opposed to smaller businesses where this is part of someone's job to get someone there effectively, and it's quite a big undertaking to do it for the first time. So my I guess plea is talk to people who've done it before, get some advice, because there are lots of people that are keen to share what they've done. Would be included in that bracket. What works, what doesn't, tips to be successful and do things more effectively.
And do that right at the start before you start your planning, rather than get so
absolutely.
far down the line and think, actually, I could probably do know a bit more about this. Because
Exactly. From a tax perspective, you can do things a little bit to a degree retrospectively, and things like visa processing, timelines around how long you can be out in country for. No, you can't. So there's pros and cons to both.
Are there sort of common pitfalls that people will make? Mistake? Do you have a sort of a red light and you think we need to make sure they don't do that?
I'll just take the first point. Again, we're touching on immigration, but it's that can I or can't I go and work in that particular country whilst I'm determining which course or route I'm going to take. So the business visit visa, for example, it's a very vanilla grey area in terms of what that looks like. So what constitutes business practical working, and what constitutes you can go there for a conference or a meeting, as long as it's not revenue generating. So if it's any of those, business visit visas are fine. If it falls outside of any of those jurisdictions, ensure you do the right thing and get the appropriate work permits, because that can cause an issue, not just for individuals, but for the business from a compliance perspective, and also reputational risk. So that would be the one takeaway from that part of things.
And I would say there's going to be, there already is, but there's going to be increasing connection between immigration and the IRS in the US, an alignment there. So if there's someone that's not on the correct visa, that will follow through into the tax considerations of that. So I totally agree with John about not flouting, using an ESTA, for example, to travel to the US for genuine work purposes. Have you got any other?
Yeah, well, I think just following on from that, and an extension to it is understanding where you've got filing requirements.
Yeah.
So you might set up in one of the states, but if you've got sort of transactions with customers in multiple states, then you may already have a requirement to register in their states. And understanding that is really, really challenging, particularly if you're not used to that sort of different regional sort of variation that we've touched on.
I don't want to finish on pitfalls, because that's a negative thing. Let's finish on positives. Any top tips for success? And if there's one thing that you'd like people to take away if they're thinking about the US as a possible market, they should think about what? Who wants to go first?
I think get advice. As soon as you're thinking about sort of looking to the US for expansion, take advice. Work out why you're going, and ensure that you're clear on that, and speak to people who've done this before.
Yeah.
I'd say know your timelines, because there's a lot of fantastic solutions out there. The US is a hugely advanced economy that has provided solutions to get there and do business really quickly, so it's possible to be up and running very quickly if it's right for your circumstances. But understanding what your timelines are, particularly if you're not quite sure on sending or recruiting locally, I think is really important.
I think we're all covering similar bases, but market research, understand the market. Just because you feel you should, does that make it the reason for why you actually do make that decision? So do the market research, understand the conditions of the country, understand all those things you need to consider for best practices to make that move. And between all the three elements that we've just discussed, hopefully you'll be in a good place to consider making that decision to do it.
Yeah, common thread. Plan it properly. Take your time and speak to the experts, isn't it? John, Rick, Matt, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. We'll be talking more international trade a little bit later on, specifically about companies wanting to come into the UK rather than out of the UK. But it's now time for our 90 Seconds With feature, where we put someone in the hot seat to find out a little bit more about them, their business, their work, their pleasure, maybe some things you never knew. Let's find out who we've got this time.